What's up, y'all? Welcome to Recess.
I'm Cash.
I'm Wichekia.
I'm Micah.
I'm Awate.
I'm Gyasi. We're here with Creative Justice and Converge Media. We're going to be talking to you about Seattle artists, youth issues, and many more topics. Stay tuned. Peace, y'all. Welcome to the Recess Podcast. Today, I'm very honored and very blessed to have a very special guest with us today. Today, we have a Seattle legend and a Black Panther, Mark Cook. Greetings, Mark Cook.
Okay. Introduce myself, I guess. I'm just Mark Cook. I was born and raised in Seattle, schooled in Seattle, and didn't become an activist till I was about 30 years old.
First, I want to say thank you for your contribution to activism, to the fight. So I appreciate you being here.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say was your intro to organizing?
The organizing happened while I was at the Washington State Penitentiary, and there was a movie. It was a kind of an interracial movie. It's about Jim Brown and Roselle. Well, I can't remember her name. Anyways, They played in a movie called 100 Knife Rifles. And we had a racist problem within the prison.
Yeah.
They didn't want the black prisoner to see this. They didn't want to be shown. And the black prisoner said that we're showing that or we're not coming out of our cells. And when they did that, they chose me as a leader, to speak for them. So it created a strike where prisoners did not come out the first day. Black prisoners did not come out the first day. The second day, the white prisoners saw us staying in, and they wanted to be part of the strike, so they joined at that time. And so it was a shutdown for quite a while, and it wasn't resolved until the warden called us up to put out the grievances we had, both white, black, Indian, and Mexican. They wanted the leadership to come up there, and I was chosen as a leadership, and that was the beginning of my organizing.
Wow. Did you always have would you say you were always somewhat of an organizer even before prison?
Yes, in not in very pleasant ways. I stood up for the brown skin prisoners working in the laundry who were forced to work in the back at Washington State penitentiaries. And it resulted in me confronting the laundry boss, when everyone went out to the noon meal. I stayed in when I talked to him, and I told him we didn't like what he's doing. He should change it. It'd be fair. Yeah. And of course, he smart talked with me. he said it's going to stay the way he's running it, and I pushed him into an extractor, and that was the beginning of my organizer. I don't want to say what I did after I pushed him in, but that was the beginning of my organizing.
What would you say made you get into revolutionary work?
Well, I was influenced a lot by what was going outside. At the first point, it was a Black United Front over in Chicago. And after the movie, we were let out after the movie that some of our grievances were being resolved. Black prisoners formed a group in the recreation area, and we wanted to call it the Black United Front, and they chose me as their first president, which means I get all the blame. So when the warden heard about it, he had me called into his, assistant warden's office. We called him Buffalo Head. That was the name prisoners gave him. His name, William Macklin, I remember that. And he told me there was going to be no black organizations, underground organizations in the penitentiary. And I said, it's not a gang like that. It's a cultural group. We wanted to, be involved in our culture with the outside community, and mainly inside prisoners, talk about how our culture came to be. And he says, Cook, I'm telling you this, you go out in that population tonight, and if you can't come back and show me Native Americans, Mexicans, and Hispanics and whites who want a culture group, I'm going to lock you up in that hole for 1 year, which that's scary enough. I mean, there's nothing in those cells. I've been in there before. But then, anyways, I went out in the population. I told the prisoners who were gathered at the gate around there what the Buffalo Head wanted me to do and how he threatened me. And so I began to walk around the compound. And I found a leader for the Mexican group. His name was Pablo Griego. And he said he'd be glad to do it. And I said, don't sell out on me now, because the man's going to be throw me in the hole if I can't get more guys to do this. And he said, I'll go with you. So we run across Jim Robidoux. He is a Native American, Sioux. And he said they want to do something like, they did outside the five feathers of 5 tribes. And he said he'd be glad to, lead an organization like that, a culture group. And then we had to figure out, what are we going to do about the white groups? And there's this one guy, he was the vice president of the Inmate Advisory Council. His name was Big Don Cole. And he said, I want to start a group. I said, Don, what kind of white group are you going to start? And he said, I'll start one. He said, if I have to do an Irish group, I'll start one for you. I said, well, you can't drop out. And if the warden asks you, you got to tell him the same thing. And so I went back in and told Buffalo Head, I found the people that wanted to start culture groups. And that was the beginning of legal culture groups in the Washington State Penitentiary. In fact, in the Washington State prison system, all over. So, and when we started that group off, it said it's not going to be no BUF, Black United Front. And so I went back and talked to the prisoners. He told them that. And so we kind of manipulated the letters around. We came up with the Black Prisoners Forum Unlimited, which had BUF stuck in there. And it was accepted. It became popular, and other prisons wanted to form groups similar to ours. And at that time, I was a Black Panther. And I became a Black Panther when my comrade, Clement Blanchie, and I were influenced by the Seattle Black Panthers. They went on a demonstration at the Capitol in Washington State in Olympia, and they stood on the Capitol steps with guns, shotguns, and announced themselves as a Black Panther Party for self-defense. So we got hold of their materials, the 10-point program, and other materials that were coming in. We kind of had to smuggle them in at that time, getting the Panther newspaper, et cetera. And my comrade said he wanted to start a group. And I said, well, what are we going to do? He said, we'll write to Oakland and get permission from the Central Committee. And so we wrote, and he came back with the answer, yes, it's all right for us to start a chapter. And so we said, well, who's going to be the head of this thing? And we flipped a coin. He became captain, I became first lieutenant. And I was what called a lieutenant of information and education. So we started our group, but kind of underground, in the recreation area. When we had a private place, we'd sit and talk. And of course, the snitches ran straight to the man again. Old Buffalo Head called me in, and he said the warden is going to have no underground organization around here. And I told him, well, this is a culture. No, it's not a culture group. He said, we know what the Panthers are. And so he took it before the warden. Bob Ray was the warden at that time at Washington State Penitentiary. And he said, there's going to be no underground groups of any kind while I'm running this penitentiary. He said, I'm going to give you guys an office. So he gave us an office, the first Black Panther chapter for self-defense in the United States was formed that day, and officially by the prison. So that was the beginning of my organizing, and it kind of spread out. Other prisoners kind of caught on to what I was doing, heard what I was doing, and looked to me how they're going to start a group and doing this, that, and that. And I said, I'm not starting any groups. I said, I didn't start these. As Black prisoners started this, and I fell in, along with them. I'm it's just part of a movement.
That really snowballed.
Huh?
So it really snowballed.
Well, kind of snowballed, right. I can stop here and go on to something else. To tell them how I organized that first. Well, I didn't organize it. There's an underground group in the prison. They wanted to start an underground newspaper, journalism. And because the newspaper we had was censored by the administration, anything we put in there, it'd only be stuff that didn't bother their image. And so he had me meet on the yard. That big yard was 3 or 4 other prisoners who were involved. That they were his cellmates, and so they had this idea how we could create a printing press and do a distribution, underground distribution, and we couldn't tell anybody in the institution who we were. They'd use anonymous names, and we printed our articles. And so we did that, and 2 of them were Canadians, and they had read this book on the Second World War, U.S. and Canadian prisoners, how they created an underground press in the prison camp, German prison camps, to make identification when they escaped, when they tried to escape. So if they were stopped by the police, they'd have perfect identification. And the way they did it was kind of miraculous. So we copied their method, and eventually, I won't go through all the details, we created an underground press using a mimeograph machine, kind of an ink that if it stayed in the light too long, it disappeared. But anyway, we call our newsletter The Bomb.
Wow.
And we wrote about grievances within the prison, and it was simple grievances, not really serious, and some were serious. And in order to get all the prisoners on the same page, because we were dealing with that racism and other ethnic antagonisms going on within the prison. And so we didn't want to disrupt anything. We didn't want them to know who we were black, white, Canadian, or what. We just wanted to print what they wanted to hear. That would bring everybody together. And after a series of our newspapers, and we wanted kind of a slogan to bring us together. And Don Cole was outside of our group. He was reading the Bomb, he was reading about it. He said, yeah, we got to get together on this thing. He said, we'll get everybody together. He made a little picket sign on a stick, and he walked around the yard with it. And on it said, if you care, grow a hair. The rules in the penitentiary, you could have no long hair, nothing longer than a 1/4 inch, no face hair, no mustache, no sideburns, no beards. And so that became our slogan. And so we put it in the newsletter. This is the slogan that everybody wanted. So we told everybody grow hair. So it ended up growing long hair. The hippies were doing good outside, so the prisoners decided they'd try that. And of course, we got arguments that it causes lice and everything when you grow long hair. And we said, well, what about the women prisoners? They got long hair. They said, well, that's something else. But anyways, so we grew our beards and stuff, and that became the first mass movement we had. And it was, they couldn't lock everybody up.
Right.
Even the snitches ran to snitch off people. That didn't do any good. So it was the main slogan to keep everybody together. We used anonymous stories, or authors in the stories. We listened to prison officials who had grievances against each other, and even outside of prison. Sometimes they'd have fights right outside the prison, all the prison guards would. But anyway, there was people who were interfering with each other's love life, so to speak. So we got hold of these stories and stuck it in there, so we get the guards on with what we were doing, so they wouldn't object too much, because they started looking for our newsletter. We didn't print very many. Yeah. I didn't print very many. It was about 1,700 prisoners in Walla Walla at that time, and so we were lucky if we could do say 10%. And it circulated fast. Everybody wanted them, and even the administration wanted. So when we walked by what we call this is a central area for the guards. They all came there, and when the prisoners going to go to hold, everybody went there. But anyways, we started dropping copies of our newsletter off the Bomb in front of this spot, and they struggled and scratched, and the sergeants generally got them first, but it passed around. So everybody was getting this little newsletter, and we still kept it underground where nobody knew who was doing it. I was within the black movement as we had it at that time, so I could knew who to give the newsletter to, so it'd be read, and pass around. And the same way we went with the other prisoners. We had people who didn't know who was printing the Bomb, but when they got a packet of them, they would distribute them. And so that became the main part of the movement. And we pushed further, where we said we want things in the prisons changed so we'd be more compatible with each other, and there was a director of the prisons in the capital, and he was some kind of a what's it called, it's not sociologist, it's a psychiatrist. And he said, it might be a good idea, find out what they want, what they have them put something down in writing. So that's the message came back to the warden. So he's trying to figure out who were was the leadership. In prisons, we're called con bosses. And nobody is elected a con boss. You just happen to be one. If you're working in the shop and you begin knowing where all the tools are and how to work, eventually you became a con boss. Or if you're playing basketball and you're the hottest one on the court, you became a con boss. So he went to the con bosses that he could find, some ones that are in school, and there was a program he started called it Social Studies. It's a Walla Walla community college program. And he wanted to pick out the con bosses he could find to go to that college. And that's how, in a sense, we got together. The people who were doing the bomb, he sent them to college. And when we hit the big yard, we'd gather around and say, we're taking over this joint, so to speak, you know. And so they wanted somebody to write out a memorandum how prisoners wanted things set up. So we wrote out an organization called oh gosh, oh my, resident, gosh, excuse me.
No.
But anyways, we wrote a diagram for how to run the prison, kind of a constitution. And we wanted everything. We shot for the moon in this thing. We just us, and we were the underground newspaper who did this, but we passed it off to ourselves. We're above ground too, so they gave it to the warden. So he sent it to Olympia, and he said they're not going to have that in my prison. Nobody runs my prison. And so they read in Washington. They read that thing. I mean, in the Capitol, they read it, and they sent it back to him and said, "Get those prisoners to write something else, and tell them this is too much. Just be reasonable and write another one." So we wrote another one where we'd lost everything. You know, the prison guard could beat us if we were wrong. You know, it's all right if they did that. We wouldn't mind. And so they wrote that one and sent it. And the prisoners didn't like it at all. So in the bomb, we wrote an article talking about those guys who wrote that Constitution for you are selling you out. And so bring your copies of the Constitution in front of the mess hall and burn them. And so they did. Prisoners from all 6 wings came with the Constitution, threw them in a big pile, and set them on fire. And a message went to the warden that they weren't going for that. They're giving the warden too much stuff. So we made a middle ground contract. We wrote up same people. You know, we're underground, telling them they're not getting it right, and above we're rewriting it. And so we rewrote. The last one was called Resident Governmental Council, RGC. And I'm going to leave this story just a little bit to let you know why we called it RGC. One of our members was a Canadian, and his name was Wayne Roberts. And so he was a youngster. He got caught up in some kind of a robbery and got second-degree assault, or murder. No, they're doing life. And so we were going to get him out of prison. So RGC stood for Roberts Goes to Canada. So, and so as we worked this program, and it was accepted by the administration, nobody knew why we'd call it the RGC, but Resident Governmental Council sounded better than Prisons Council. So it was accepted, and they thought it was pretty cool, you know. And so we made a deal with them, a half and half deal, where let the prisoners run the education, or choose the education programs and the recreation programs, and you could have the security and custody stuff, the warden stuff. And they sent that to Olympia. I said, sounds good. Why don't you give them a try, see how it works? And so they sent it back. And this is pretty much documented, not this way. People are searching for the underground newspaper we wrote called The Bomb. There's various people came to interview me, asking specifically where this material is. And I didn't know. I found out they archived. Somehow the Whitman College students had got hold of all the records that were being ready to be thrown out. They archived them in Whitman Community College. I believe somewhere that little newsletter is in there. Anyways, that's coming off the side of the story. It has got nothing to do with what's going on. So that was the first real organizing. And it wasn't just me. I wasn't organizing these movements. I got caught up in the organizing the prisoners were doing. And I guess just because I could, in a sense, read and write, they figured, well, he's leadership. So they stuck me in those positions. I kind of liked it. I figured I'm going to go overboard and I'll ask for things that, you know, they're not asking for.
Yeah.
So because we went to this uh, program for the ward and social studies, contemporary social studies, we figured we could attach that to the problems of prisons and crime.
Yeah.
And we figured if there could be a, what you call it, a easy way for prisoners to be transferred out in the community, it might help the crime problem, people getting out, and also the problems they're having in prison. Now, this is some of the other prisoners got along with me. These prisoners were not in our underground group, but they were interested in what we were doing. And it happened to be that a lot of these were out of that school program. They said, what are we going to do? See, we're going to ask for jobs where we're getting paid for. You know, we're working here as slaves. So we want jobs that we can create, we can manage and run ourselves and get the profits from that. And we have to work through the warden. So we worked through the warden in Olympia, and they gave us a tier 16 cells long where we stayed. We as prisoners said, we're not going to do this unless we do all the organizing and screening. And so the way we screened it, it was going to last at least 2 years, because if we got a grant, it only lasts 2 years. So we wanted long-term prisoners that were never getting out, so the program wouldn't go away.
And what year is this?
This happened in about 1969.
Wow.
Yeah. And so they gave us this the 16 cell, I mean the long cells, and we had a little, what you call it, gift project where this one guy, a Canadian, was making gifts to be sold out in front of the prison. Is jewelry boxes, you know, little wooden boxes with a mirror in it and lined with velvet and stuff. So he had all these materials. In fact, we used some of those materials in order to make our underground press, which was a mirror framed by wood, and we'd boil some gelatin, pour it in there on top of it. When it cooled, we'd run a mimeograph paper backwards through a typewriter and lay it on the gelatin. When you smoothed it down, peel it off, the gelatin would absorb that ink out of the paper. And so we had prisoners who were thinking along these lines. The paper's out, so that story is still going. I mean, as long as we're there, it's still running. But this is getting beyond the newspaper. We want to change the prison. So we asked them if we could have a part in prison industries where we could do some practical work. You know, we want to do reupholstery, and was no reupholstery program in Walla Walla at that time. And so they let us do that. We hired a guy from downtown. He was driving while intoxicated. He got arrested so many times. They said, you're going to have to do some kind of community project. So he came up and talked to us, what we're doing up there. We told him what we wanted to do. He said, well, I can teach you guys to do reupholstery. And so he got an old chair out of a burned down house as a sofa. So we brought it up there, stripped it down, and he showed us how to rebuild it from the frame on up. And he put it, after it was done, he said, well, I'll put this in the shop window. They put it in the shop window, and people were bidding on it. And the price got up to around $400. And he said, we're not going to sell this. He brought it back to the prison and told us what we had done. And so we had a reupholstery shop set up inside prison industries, but it's just run by us, the prisoners of 15 years or more. And the prison, what you call it, director of prison industries came and told us that was the only shop in all their prisons that was making any money.
Yeah.
the one we were running. And so we pushed a little farther and asked the warden if could we use the old women's quarters. Now, the old women's quarters, they did deserted them maybe about a year before. They built a brand new prison in Purdy, Washington, where all the women prisoners are shipped off there. And the other one sat empty right next to the prison, about maybe 100 yards away from the main prison. And he says, you guys are crazy. What do you mean, give you a prison? They said, no. They said, well, we just want to, set up a shop there. And he said, no. If you did it, you'd have to pay. The people in Olympia told him if they wanted something like that, they'd have to pay for it, and they'd have to get the money for it. And there's no way, prison's going to get any kind of money. Right. Well, again, they made a mistake by putting all our minds together in that college program. So we figured, how are we going to get the money? There's another Canadian from Canada. And he says, well, I've worked with the University of Washington, and I set up the identification program for them. And he says, I know how to write a grant. So we sat down and wrote grants. Many of them kicked back to us. There was 5 of them that stuck with us and said they'd give us $250,000 for a 2-year period program. And so we approached the warden and said, "Does people want to give us the money to do this program?" They didn't give us much, but we gave $250,000. He said, "What?" he said, "You know the rules in this institution, blah, blah." And he said, "You gave us a little room. You said we'd have to ask them for the money, or nothing." He said, "Cool, all right, I'm going to go right to Olympia." So he went to Olympia with the program and the offer of funding us. And Department of Corrections said, "That's cool." They let them have the money and let them try and run their program. And if it fails, and most of us think it's going to fail, we'll let you have it. So we screened the prisoners through what we call a little family program, the little 16-tier program we had inside the prison, and picked guys who we want to put outside, telling them, nobody messes up. If anybody messes up, we're going to roll you up in a mattress and send you back inside, but nobody's going to mess up with this program. You have to swear on that before we go out there. And then we had the 4 rules: no drugs, no alcohol, no violence, and no apathy. You had to be with the program. So they gave us the program outside of the penitentiary, no guards. There was one guard who had to count 3 times a day to make sure everybody was there. Doors were unlocked, but we weren't really allowed to go outside the prison. We had a little yard. It's built like a square with the cells around the square. So we had a little yard of basketball and softball inside. So we played in there. We had money, and we ordered all the materials that were needed. All the cooking, everything was done inside this women's prison thing. We had bunks for more than, and at 16, there's enough bunks for all the women that were in there, but we only used the 2 bottom floors and 1 side for our bunks, our setup. And we invited people in from the outside the city, from the colleges. We had the Walla Walla Community College and the Whitman Community College and other programs. So they were interested in coming in and seeing what we were doing. We were able to contract with various offices outside of the prisons, schools, what do you call it, military organizations, government organizations, state organizations had damaged furniture rather than buying new. They sent it into us to repair. So we're repairing it, getting paid for it. This is a nonprofit program at that time. They don't have nonprofit programs like that anymore. But the idea is we're trying to transform this small group or this organization into a job, a paying job for prisoners, so there'd be a smoother transition from prison back into the community. It wouldn't be lock you up for 15 years doing nothing but making license plates and send you out and try to find a job. So this was our first try at this. It seemed to be working at this level. Nobody had gone off yet. The warden, it was the governor of the state of Washington, was Dan Evans. He heard about a program, came down to look at it. And the guy our guy who wrote the grant, helped write the grant, is Roger Braithwaite. He was a Canadian prisoner. And he walked with the governor, pointing out how things were running. And he trying to act like a big shot. I guess he did pretty good, because he pointed at me and he said, "That guy is responsible for this. He's the one that kept this thing organized and moving. And he should be, in a halfway house outside, but we got to keep him here." And the governor, Dan Evans, told the warden to send that man to Seattle in a halfway house. And I went to the halfway house. They shipped me, packed all my stuff together. There was a social worker we had working with us. He said, "I'm going there for a vacation. We'll give him a ride in my car." So I had her up there to a halfway house in Seattle on 11th and Spur, somewhere around in there. And when I got there, nobody knew who I was. I had all my 3 boxes there of goods, and the social worker, his buddy, they left me there, and they didn't know who I was. So I said, "Let me go home. You can figure it out later on." He says, "No, you're staying here till we figure it out." It took him a couple of days. They finally figured out what happened, how the Dan Evans had me sent up there. So I stayed in that halfway house, and I had a mandatory 15 years. Now, mandatory means you can't even go before the parole board Today you do 15 years. But I was in a halfway house outside of the penitentiary. The parole board came down and said, if you keep your nose clean for 1 year, and nobody's ever stayed in a halfway house for 1 year, we'll let you go. So they kept me in a halfway house. They gave me a, student work release program from prison. And they paid for my college and my board and room there at the halfway house for 1 year. So I majored in math and I stayed down there.
And you're how old at this time?
Huh?
You're how old at this time?
At this time, I'm in my 30s because I'm a panther now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I left I'm a panther. And when I got there, I went out and looked for the panthers, by the way. So I couldn't find them. I went to the panther headquarters. There's two people there, a guy, Morris White, and a woman. And they said, well, everybody's down in Oakland being bodyguards for Elaine Brown, who had taken over the Panther Party. And so I'm anxious to get something started while I'm there. I'm in school. They give me a 1 hour leave between school and coming back. And I walked back, so I had all that spare time. So I find out where other people were active doing prison work. And I went in to see them. There was a Women Out Now organization run by some women. Two of them happened to become brigaders later on. And I respectfully referred to them as the lesbianese, when I was talking to the panthers to everybody. Just like inside, we had two gay guys, and I just referred to them as the fancy lads, but they became lieutenants running important missions within the prison. And so it was easy for me to build up relationships that were generally taboo, both inside and outside. And other prisoners coming to us. I met the people who were trying to do prison union work, they called it. The prison union, they went to Monroe Penitentiary, and every prisoner in there carried a union card from the prisoners union at that time. And it was run by two prisoners, John Sherman and Ed Mead, who later become brigaders. Okay, I don't know I'm organizing right now.
You're having
I have no idea. I'm looking for the panthers. I can't find them, so I'm doing my own organizing. And so I also went down to various churches looking for funding. I went to the American Friends Service Committee and told them what I was trying to do, this transition from prison out here, make it easier and get them the right to vote. And so I came up with this idea of starting a political organization. And there's a teacher I had, her name was Mrs. Hastings, and she's teaching reading and writing. And I told her about what I was trying to do. And she said, "Oh, you got to have a name that'll attract people coming into it." And I said, "Oh, what do I call it? I want a convention for the prisoners." She said, "Well, we do a capital C-O-N. We'll call it Convention, Convention 73. So this is a teacher who gave me the name for this program. She became part of the program. There was other faculty, huh?
No.
There's other faculty. If I get off track, I thought I'm trying to stay on track. I don't want to lose it.
But I do want to ask you a question.
Okay, sure. In fact, as soon as I get through with the community college, get them organized. Okay, I got Sandra Hastings doing our editorial work. And there's another teacher called Erasmo Gamboa, who is a Hispanic, and he's interested in all this. He's out on the streets, both he's demonstrating, and this is during the Vietnam War at the time. And so I'm not doing no demonstrating. I can't do that. It's not legal. So, but I'm hooking up with these people who are doing it. Okay, and
you're still going through the half.
We'll stop here. It's organized at this point. This is the beginning of convention. The two principal, the right for prisoners to vote. They're disenfranchised, so we're trying to reverse it. Make it so prisoners can vote, and they can have fair labor action within the prison. They could have a union, etc. This is all in the program I'm trying to write, and I'm getting money from outside, from the church groups, to get these things going. The halfway house I'm in is run by the Department of Corrections. So they get my letters, open them, and see these checks in there. And I tell them what I'm trying to do. Kind of look at it, I'm embarrassed. I'm getting ready to send me back to the penitentiary. I mean, all this other stuff was cool. But when you start asking for money, so we got that. Anyways, go ahead and I'll tell you what happens later.
I was going to ask you, about your relationship with George Jackson and how his teachings influenced your work.
That started in the penitentiary, and that's what I was teaching prisoners while I was in the penitentiary as the minister or lieutenant of information and education. I had to tell them the Panther program and what we were trying to compare ourselves, and not compare, but we're in prison trying to do the same kind of program outside. They could have guns, so they got each prisoner, Panther outside has to have a gun and 100 rounds of ammunition. That's all over the United States. That's the requirement.
Right.
So we're underground. We can't do that. So we're telling ourselves we have to go underground. But while we're in prison, we're going to make the jobs fairer here than they've ever been before. It follows the Panther program. There's 10 points. We have to ask for the ability to determine our own destiny. That's number one in the Panther program. So that's among us here. We're trying to get the opportunity to gosh, I'm stuck here. But anyways, determine our own destiny.
Right.
As prisoners, we want fair treatment, we want fair jobs, we want to be able to write the vote, etc. These are just some of the things, but there's a lot of things we have to do, but they have to stick with the Panther program. And at that time, of course, prisoners in Monroe heard about it, what we were doing down there. They wanted a culture group, and I wanted a Panther group. So I got hold of the letter, and I had a person I had already sent up to Monroe, who wrote him a letter so he could be closer to his family in Seattle. And I sent it to him, and he passed it on to the prisoners at Monroe. And that was the beginning of the Black Culture Group. I wanted to be the Black Panther Group. And I couldn't get them. They said they were kind of a little frightened about this Panther Group up there. They couldn't get parole. They had a parole board at that time. They didn't want to mess up their paroles. So they just wanted a culture group. So again, I did the acronym, BPC. It'd be the Black Chapter of Panther. They didn't know it. But anyway, they got them a program in Monroe, and they started that program. And many years later, of course, I'm jumping over tens of years to get up there. I finally got into that prison and talked to him, and his Black Prisoner Forum Unlimited. I mean, the Black Prisoner Caucus was there, when I was there. I went through time, I went through and got out, and many years later, it formed again, and these Black Prisoner Caucus people are coming out into the population, today. It's a shocked the shit out of me. Excuse me. I did that one was still going on 60 years. They didn't even know. We weren't even born at the time this thing started, but they got hold of it and put it back together the way they wanted, And I just still amazed at it. In fact, I'll probably speak about it. I go before Panther Group later on.
We are running short on time.
Okay, that's good. I'm almost ready to go.
I feel like we need part two, to be honest. I would hope for a part two, to be honest. But, just one last question. What change do you feel like you made through your work, through your many years of work?
Well, I didn't know I was making changes, and the Black Prisoner Caucus, like I say, it surprised me. So changes were made. People are realizing that we have to come together as a community, that people are actually attacking our community, breaking it up, because we have something that's spreading over to other communities. The Brown Panthers, the AIM movement, the White Panthers, all of this stuff is spreading up everywhere. And from those groups, people have learned to organize within their communities to do things for the community that the government will not do. One of our legacies is, and I say this about the Seattle Black Panthers, they started a medical program within the Panthers, and it's become Carolyn Downs Clinic here in Seattle. It was the first free clinic in Seattle. And within other groups, we're doing the same thing, things that have continued it after that time of the Vietnam War. And that's what glued everybody together.
Really?
The Vietnam, the objection to that, people had the same cause in mind, their own separate causes. Together, they did demonstrations against the Vietnam War across the around the world. And it changed things. It definitely changed. And the demonstrations today are a sense taken from the abuses and successes of demonstrations they had back then for different things. Yeah.
So you would say the change, if not
grassroots, it changed grassroots politics.
Right.
Yeah.
Is generational.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Mhm.
I appreciate
All right.
everything. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Recess Podcast. Thank you, Mark Cook, for being on here. Thank you, Converge Media, for hosting this. Make sure to tune into our YouTube, Instagram, all our socials. Hit us up for, whatever. We got ideas, for Seattle and mental health. More podcasts on the way concerning mental health and intersection between everybody who lives here in our communities. So please get at us. Thank you for tuning in. You guys have a wonderful day. Peace.